Good evening, friends. Tonight we're going to make a classic spaghetti bolognese, but with a twist. A traditional bolognese is made with ground meat, but in the spirit of trying to be healthier, we're going to make it using impossible meat. I hope you'll enjoy this, and I hope that this video will give a chance to my vegetarian friends to enjoy spaghetti bolognese at home. On our ingredients list, what I've done is chop 4 cloves of garlic and added some freshly diced rosemary to it as well. We'll be making use of that. Over here we've got some freshly chopped carrots, celery and onion. The easiest thing to do, honestly, is to buy it pre-chopped from Trader Joe's. It saves you so much time and hassle. To help substitute for the fact that we aren't going to be using ground meats today, pick some nice white mushrooms, or you can substitute them for cremini mushrooms, which I will be dicing as a meat substitute. And I'll be using a pound of impossible meat. So I've preheated this Dutch oven on a medium heat. I'm going to add some extra virgin olive oil to it. And we're going to start warming up the oil before we add our meat. Traditionally, bolognese is made with a combination of veal, pork, and beef. But today we're going to be using impossible meat, and since that has a much lower fat content than what I had mentioned previously, we're going to have to use a little more oil in order to prevent it from burning and drying up. When your oil is nice and hot, then you can add your meat or meat substitute. If you are using real meat, then I suggest you go for something that has about a 90% meat, 10% fat mixture. If you use very fatty meat, at the end of it you'll have a film of oil on top of your bolognese, and that's not pleasant. Whereas if it's too lean, so leaner than 90%, you're going to end up with a very dry sauce. So I think 90-10 is the right mix. Here with impossible meat we don't have that choice. Alright, so the impossible meat is in, and you have to break it up. So impossible meat cooks much faster than real meat, so just keep an eye on it. Again, that's probably because of the low fat content. I haven't seasoned it yet. I wanted it to start to brown, and as you can see, it's about 2/3 brown before I start adding fresh ground black pepper and some coarse kosher salt. I tend to season it more heavily with impossible meat than with real meat because it just has a lower salt content, and frankly, I think it has lower flavor amount than real meat does. With your meat almost brown, I create a little well at the bottom of the pan to add our vegetables. So as a reminder, it was carrots, celery and onions. The reason I like using carrots is that it gives it a little sweetness, and the tomatoes you get in cans are nowhere as sweet as the ones in Italy, and so the carrots will help substitute for the natural sweetness that real Italian tomatoes have. So it's taken about 12 minutes for the meat to brown and for the vegetables to soften. Now I'm going to be adding in the sliced garlic and the diced fresh rosemary. Rosemary is kind of an unusual ingredient to use in bolognese, but I'm trying to enhance the flavors to make up for the fact that we're not using actual meat. Now, very non-traditionally, I'm going to be adding some diced white mushrooms to it. This is definitely not the way Mama would make it in Italy, but we're trying to keep it much lighter by having more vegetables and less meat in there. Now, mushrooms, as we've come to learn, are going to give up a lot of moisture, unfortunately, so don't be alarmed, that's quite natural. Give it a good stir and expect the moisture to come, and then we'll boil it off before we add our tomato sauce to it. What you will need to do at this point is add a lot more seasoning again. We basically have 2 or 3 times the content in this pot than we did the last time we added seasoning. So fresh ground pepper and coarse kosher salt go in as well. So as you can see, the water's boiled off, the vegetables are sauteed. This doesn't look anything like what you'd expect bolognese to look like, so don't worry, it will all come together in the end, I promise. It is now time to add our tomato sauce. I'm using a very large can of crushed tomatoes. In it goes. If you have the opportunity to use San Manzo tomatoes, they are sweeter and more traditional. So this is not what you'd expect Bolognese to look like. You may have thought you've done it wrong if it's looking like this watery, kind of soft mixture that hasn't quite all come together yet. But don't panic, I promise you, if you give it some time, all the flavors are going to bind together and it'll start to go from looking more like a soup as it does now to a ragu, a rich, delicious sauce that you can put on your pasta. So the next step might surprise you a little bit, but I'm going to add a little milk to it. The milk will give it a creaminess, a velvetyness, but you're going to have to let it cook for a while for that to happen. Only about maybe a half a cup of milk. That's about half a cup. So it's taken about 40 minutes for the sauce to reach this consistency where most of the liquid has boiled off, but there's still quite a bit there. Do not be alarmed by that. We're going to add some more spices to it now to up the flavor, and then we're going to use a hand blender to get it all to be quite smooth and consistent. So what I'm holding here is some fresh nutmeg. If you like, you can use pre-ground nutmeg, and this will give it a nice little tingy flavor to it. Okay, so that was about a quarter of a nutmeg I used. Next, we're going to add a little sugar to it because, as I mentioned, the canned tomatoes are not as sweet as real Italian tomatoes. So about 2 teaspoons of sugar should suffice. Finally, I'm going to add a bit of heat to it with some chili flakes. Add to your preference. So I gave it a little taste and it could have used a little more sugar, so I put in 1 more teaspoon of sugar. It really depends on the kind of tomato sauce that you're using. Next, we're going to grate some fresh Parmesan cheese in here. I'm now grating in some 24-month aged Parmesan. Be generous with it. This is good stuff. So I'm going to use a hand blender just to get it all smooth and consistent. You really don't have to do it. It's more for appearance than anything else. So I didn't blend it to make it super smooth. I think that Bolognese is something that's quite rustic and still should have some chunks of vegetables in it, but it's much more consistent now. Final ingredient I'm adding is some chopped parsley. If you don't like parsley, you can easily skip this step. So our salted water is bubbling, ready for the pasta to go in. I'm using this beautiful hand-cut ribbon pasta. It is just so pretty. You can use whatever pasta you like. And in they go. So our pasta is not quite cooked yet, but that's all right because I'm going to finish it in the saucepan so that all of those lovely flavors can be absorbed into the pasta as it cooks. I have drained the pasta off its water and in it goes to be incorporated into the Bolognese sauce. So there it is. We're just going to finish it off now with a little fresh black pepper, some more Parmesan cheese, and finally some freshly diced basil. That's fresh basil. Well, my friends, there you have vegetarian Bolognese ribbon pasta from my house to yours. I hope you enjoy it. Please tune in for other episodes, subscribe, and give me a like if you enjoyed this.